I want to thank Reverend Glenn Farley for his invitation to come and share a few words today. So let me give thanks to the ancestors, those we know, those we do not know, and believe it or not, those who know us better than we know ourselves. Some of you may recognize that as an African spiritual practice, tradition point. And Susanna brings that up with that wonderful song as a reminder. So we believe that it's from the ancestors that all blessings flow. And I ask you to think about that also. For if there's anything we know about everybody in this room, everybody, is that you came from a mother and a father, and 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 a mother and a father, as far back as we can go. And we simply say, what is a better place to start than to simply say thank you? We believe it not only is empowering, but it literally asks us to practice humility. For without them, there is no us. So it's very, very simple. So some of you know that I am finishing up my first year at the Star King School for the Ministry in Berkeley, California, in Unitarian Universalism, which to a lot of friends and myself is quite a shock. The first time I ran into Unitarian Universalism, my mental response was, I don't do church. When I was invited by a man who had a "We Stand in the Name of Love" shirt on. That's a long story, but what came out of my mouth was, okay. And that was about 4 years ago now, and the rest is history. But I do want to talk a little bit about our ancestors, your ancestors in Unitarian Universalism. You know, as I continue my studies, I got to be honest with you. I am blown away by the impact of this tiny, tiny denomination throughout history, and the impact that it has had and continues to have on American society. Mind-boggling. And I want to speak about one man in particular. Some of you, I hope, are familiar with his name, and that's William Ellery Channing. Ring any bells? Yeah, raise it high. Yes, good. Yeah. We like that participation thing. That's that African thing. Do we like that back and forth, that call and response? Let me know I'm not alone. Oh, it's critical. So, yeah, William Ellery Channing, who my favorite historian up to this point on UUism is a man named David Robinson. David Robinson has a quote about William Ellery Channing. That's why I got my UU jacket on today and stuff like that. I'm speaking, got Mr. Channing, trying to channel him as best I can. But Mr. Robinson says of Mr. Channing, quote, William Ellery Channing is the single most important figure in the history of American Unitarianism. Key phrase for me is American, because I'm always into this ancient stuff. And I want us to own American Unitarianism, preceded by that which came from Europe, in England in particular, preceded by that which goes all the way back to Origin. And I'll drop the curtain there for now, for in our Western philosophy and look at life, we drop the curtain at Greece. And that's a sermon for another day. But I'd offer you to take a look at what was beyond that curtain. In fact, Origen himself, who is recognized as the father of Unitarianism around 235 AD, whatever the year was. Reverend Farley will forgive me if I get the date wrong. I hope you will too. My point is, we never talk about where he was born and where he went to school, even though it's right there in Google. See, he was born in Africa. He went to school in Africa, country there called Egypt, born in Alexandria. But again, just planting seeds for another day. But Mr. Channing delivered this sermon in 1828 in Providence, Rhode Island. And as fate would have it, at the ordination of Reverend F.A. Farley. Ain't this something? 'Tis the truth. Whether it's one of Glenn's ancestors, we may find out, won't know, but I don't know. But I found that fascinating. So it was at Reverend Farley's ordination that the single most important man in American Unitarianism delivered his most famous sermon. And it was entitled, Likeness of God. I got to tell you, I found this sermon profound because as a wordsmith and a poet and a writer guy, I'm listening to a friend, one of my teachers, remind us that most of us have about 1,500 words in our vocabulary. And not too long ago, the English language hit the 1 million word mark. And when I read these old guys and gals, mostly guys, you do understand. That's again a story for another day. But I believe the words of that sermon could be delivered and be appropriate in any UU congregation today. And I will share some of those words with you, and you let me know if you concur or not. But his use of language just fills my mental cavity with admiration and envy. Yes. In fact, I'm going to recommend in Star King, we not only could, of course, we study chanting big time, but this particular sermon, I think, can handle a class on its own. So Mr. Channing said, and I quote, talking about God. Same thing Morgan Freeman is talking about now. Anybody watching that series? Who is God on Nat Geo? Well, Mr. Channing says, God is another name for human intelligence. Ooh. Raised above all error and imperfection and extended to all possible truth. End quote. He said God is another name for human intelligence, raised above all error and imperfection, and extended to all possible truth. Then he asked the question, whence do we derive our knowledge? From whence do we derive our knowledge of the attributes and perfections which constitute the Supreme Being? Where do we get those ideas from? He says, we derive them from our own souls. The divine attributes are first developed in ourselves. They are first developed in ourselves. And then, he didn't say then, and thence transferred to our Creator. The idea of God, sublime and awful as it is the idea of our own spiritual nature, purified and enlarged to infinity. End of quote. I think that could be worth a conversation in a UU coffee clutch round somewhere today. I call this self-development on steroids. That was a big move in UUism around self-culture and self-development. But it reminds us that we all have that spark of divinity, kind of what the name is today. And it challenges us to bring our spark out of the dark. That the universe is not only out there, but in here. I quote him one more time. The soul, by its sense of right, or its perception of moral distinction, is clothed with sovereignty of itself. And through this alone, it understands and recognizes the sovereign of the universe. Now, I must admit, there was time that I tensed up at his, what shall we call it, paternalistic pattern of language usage, for lack of a better phrase. It's one of the things I learned, love about Star King also. We have curriculums entitled things like anti-patriarchy, anti-white superiority, anti-sexism. And I was shocked because, most folks won't even want to recognize that oppression and sexism and racism and class even exist. So what kind of school is this that's got whole curricula like that? So I must admit it attracted me. And it's been fascinating so far. But somehow my tension was relieved a little bit when he said something like this, and I quote again. I do and I must reverence human nature. Neither the sneers of a worldly skepticism, nor the groans of a gloomy theology disturb my faith in its godlike powers and tendencies. Now I know how it is despised, how it has been oppressed, how civil and religious establishments have for ages conspired to crush it. I know its history. I shut my eyes on none of its weaknesses and crimes. I shut my eyes on none of its weaknesses and crimes. I understand the proofs by which despotism demonstrates that man is a wild beast and one of a master and only safe in chains. But injured, trampled on, and scorned as our nature is, I still turn to it. I still turn to it with intense sympathy and strong hope. End of quote. And I must add, so do I. In spite of it all, I think we're all we got. So I stand recognizing that oppression and that civil and religious crushing and the weaknesses and the crimes. But I still do my best to maintain a sense of intense sympathy and strong hope. Man, I simply love his language and his kind of mind-engaging use of that stuff. Now, Mr. Channing also has advice for Reverend Glenn, those of us in seminary, and those who will practice some form of religious tradition around the world as practitioners of religious teachings, I say, which again I find so applicable to UU beliefs, demands, and concerns right now. Quote, let our teachings rise above the technical, obscure, and frigid theology which has come down to us from times of ignorance, superstition, and slavery. Let it penetrate the human soul and reveal it to itself. No preaching, I believe, is so intelligible as that which is true to human nature. I want to say that again. Can I say that again? Yeah. No preaching, I believe, is so intelligible at that which is true to human nature and helps men to read their own spirit, and women, I might add. Please. So, reading, chanting, I'm working with this teacher up here. So I have teaching aids. So chanting reminds me to pull my lighter out of my pocket. And I invite you to do the same, or book of matches out of your purse and light your own spark of divinity within. It's just a constant reminder that there is, and I'll quote him, quote, "There is a might within which can more than balance all the might without." All the might without. So, bzz, 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 hear that buzzing? That's the sound of a gadfly. That would be me, your friend Anthony, the gadfly. Now, we know perhaps what a gadfly is. A gadfly is defined as a person who tends to interfere with the status quo. But by asking questions that may be potentially upsetting. And I love that word because I've confessed earlier to words. There's just something about when I hear that word, gadfly. It speaks to me. I get images of Great Gatsby, or I don't know what it is. Y'all got to help me out, but gadfly. In fact, I'm publishing a book of poetry of mine, and I'm going to call it Gadfly. Thank you for clapping. I want to do a quick poem. It's totally on the spur, but talk about women. Because in all the readings about chanting, woman is not mentioned. Not mentioned at all, man. And I know people say, well, you have to understand the time. Me no understand. Understand. No blame, no shame. No. Put all your blame, I put my blame guns away, the shame stuff in the holster, and we call it like we see it. So for you, magnificent woman, yes ma'am, you, I have a question. What if God is a woman? Ooh. What do you mean, what if? Tell me I didn't know who I was looking at. I felt you. So what if God is a woman and she's coming soon? Tracy, you ever see a man didn't come from a womb? Ever see one that didn't end up in a tomb of some kind? Me, I'm a child of the commode, and I see all behind. And I listen with my eyes, and I see her, Jovine. I see her in skin of black lacquer, pipe in her mouth, full of wondrous laughter, calling her out of her gender all these years, and we wonder why feminine energy shed so many tears. Could you just imagine what it would be like, I don't know, if God was always referred to as an eel? How could a gorilla relate? Somebody better call Darwin. It's getting late. It's getting late. Now, my friends, the Muslims, say God has no gender. Ain't tough, ain't tender. Maybe both, maybe neither. I don't know. Do you? Do you? Do you? I say it's time for a new blue haiku. That's what Sekou say. I say I'm too sinister to be a minister. You see, I eat too much ham to be an imam. And I'm too full of yeast to be a priest. Too frail to find the Holy Grail. Too frail to find the Holy Grail. And I didn't go to school long enough to be called a doc. Didn't go to school long enough to be called a doc. But every now and then I can feel it. I can feel it. Didn't go to school long enough to be called a doc. But every now and then I can feel it, that space between the tick and the tock. Between the tick and the tock. So good afternoon, good doubt, and I'm out.